We have little fire ants, really hell west and crooked here on the island of Hawaii. It's present on both coasts. It's also just recently been discovered on a coffee farm, which is rather disastrous because I'm a big time coffee drinker and I don't want to pay any more for my coffee. So we'll certainly be working with Ms. Johnson, who I think spoke earlier, and trying to develop management strategies for the coffee industry. So just to go through some of the impacts that little fire ants have for some of the council persons that may not have experienced this. Little fire ants are a non-discriminatory invasive species. They cut across all segments of daily life. They affect people, they affect industries, and they affect the environment as well. And they really don't care about anything that they touch. This thing's locked up for some reason. Here we go. So one of the issues that we deal with on a daily basis is just homeowners, residents, agricultural workers getting stung. And because little fire ants don't limit their foraging to the ground layer, we find them nesting right up into the canopy of quite tall vegetation. So if you can imagine the tallest coconut palm here on the island, if it's in a fire ant area, there'll be fire ants in the top of that coconut palm. They might be 100 feet tall. There are fire ants up there. And you'd think a species evolved to live in the canopy would be very good at hanging on, and unfortunately these guys aren't. So any little breeze or bump, and you'll get a little rain of these very, very small ants falling on people and falling on animals, at which point people invariably get stung. In the case of domestic animals, I'm having some troubles here, they can cause some disastrous consequences over time. Ants will get trapped in animals' fur and invariably end up around the eyes where they either sting or spray venom. I'm not really certain which, but it does lead to a progressive blinding of both domestic and wild animals as well. It's a very sad sight. It's something you rarely see in areas that don't have little fire ants, but worldwide, where I've been, where we have little fire ants, domestic animals, the incidence or the rate of this tropical keratopathy is quite high. When you're in an area without little fire ants, it's something you rarely see. And they make a mess of agriculture. Pretty much anything that we grow for food and also for aesthetic purposes like foliage and flowers can become infested by little fire ants. That causes a number of issues. One of them is an obvious quarantine issue for exporting produce. If you've got tropical fruit like walnut, and you've got a lot of it here in Hilo, it's probably worth $2 a pound in season at the Hilo Farmers Market. It's worth a hell of a lot more in California. If you can't get it there, you can't realise those particular gains. It's a huge issue for agricultural workers. Any crop that requires people to manage it means that those people who will be working within that crop are going to be stung probably on a daily basis, so it's most unpleasant. The third impact it has is that these little ants will farm and ranch a lot of plant pests. They'll actually look after scales and mealybugs, whiteflies, and other sap-sucking pests, and protect them from their natural predators, and encourage their growth on agricultural crops. What that means is that there is a loss in plant productivity. So an orchard or a coffee farm or a cocoa farm basically is capable of producing less crop, even though it may not even be able to be exported. I should watch more Mick Jagger films and get right up close and personal. So yeah, in terms of agriculture, there's a quarantine issue, there's a productivity issue, a plant health issue, and certainly there's a person health issue as well. So I thought for the benefit of everyone, I'd go through just a brief history of little fire ants on this island. It was discovered by Pat Conant about 10 or now 14 years ago. And at the time of its initial discovery, it was discovered or located at 13 different sites. So 14 years ago, it was already covering multiple sites. And State Vector Control and the Department of Agriculture, this is way before my time, jumped in and had a really good go at trying to eradicate the species because they realised it was going to be a problem. And that included things like mapping infestations, responding to calls back from public outreach, and going and treating properties. But fairly quickly it became apparent that the rate of new detections far exceeded the ability of the state to deal with the existing infestations. So in other words, even though the department was spending a lot of money trying to eradicate it, it was getting away from them. So it became a math thing. Without the resources to deal with it adequately, it wasn't really possible or practical to try to eradicate it. That kind of led to a bit of a void, but the Department of Agriculture, I believe, continued to provide treatment advice and help with technical issues to affected industries and residents. Around about 2006, several researchers started looking seriously at how to deal with this on this island. Certainly, the ARS worked quite hard to look at the solutions for agriculture. There are other researchers looking at how to deal with this for the nursery industry and also for homeowners. And then in the first week of 2009, I managed to get here. I must have been packing my suitcase at the time that Resolution 816 was going through chambers, because I was here 2 weeks after that was passed through. And over the last 4 years, I guess, we've grown from having one very short-term contract with a very small amount of funds to having multiple grants with multiple agencies, we've got a few more staff. We're beginning to make some headway now. It's still very much a grant-driven thing. We have projects that agencies fund. We go and implement those projects. But the most important one for us is Little Fire Ants here in Hawaii. So just a quick bit history of the movement of Little Fire Ants through the archipelago. Very soon after it was discovered, they were discovered also in Hawaii. There was an attempted eradication. It appeared to have been successful. It hasn't been the case, and we're working now with people in Hawaii to try to re-eradicate, if you like, that particular infestation. It also found its way to Maui, and I believe we have managed to successfully eradicate it there. And in the last 3 years, it's also spread across to the west coast of this island, and it's becoming more and more common as time goes by. These are kind of concept maps. The map on the left shows an area, broadly an area from Kalapana to Lapahoehoe. Within that area, that entire area is more or less infested. Some properties are not, some properties are. If they're not, quite likely that person's neighbour or the next neighbour might have them. The map on the right is more of like a conceptual diagram, if you like, as to the density of infested properties. That's changed a bit over the last 4 years. When I first started here, we were getting most of our calls from south of Hilo through Puna, Pahoa, Kapoho and places like that, and also in Pepe'iko. Over the past 2 summers, we've found quite a rapid increase in public calls for assistance from the Hilo urban area itself. So it's now become very well established in the Hilo urban area. About half of our calls come from within town rather than on the larger properties outside of town. We do sun mapping. We don't do a lot. We've been working mainly with, we had a project that we did kind of in our spare time, I guess, looking at the state of the beach parks in the Hilo district. And more detailed maps are available on our website, but we did a survey at the 2 main beach parks to the east of us, and we also do whatever we can on the west side of Hawaii. But conceptually, on the west side, we have them distributed very sparsely, but all the way through from north to south. Just going through some of our prevention and other response activities. On the east side of the island, we work as well as closely as we can with nurseries, helping them with developing management methods to treat infested material. We are hoping to start systematically engaging the farmers markets and working with small plant vendors. Potted plants are one of the easiest ways people can move little fire ants from one location to a new location. So potted plants, the movement of potted plants, is the primary way this particular species has moved around. We've managed to develop a reasonable website, and we've on that website available for download are fairly detailed how-to guides, how to do this, how to do that. That's mainly to help homeowners and also industry with just sound technical advice. On the west side of the island, we're working primarily at the moment with the infested coffee farm, but we hope to be able to increase general public awareness of the problem on the west side of the island as well. Over the past couple of years, we've been made a couple of minor breakthroughs, I guess. We've developed a gel bait. The biggest problem with dealing with little fire ants is that the ones that annoy us are the ones up in the trees. Pardon me. And the commercial baits that are available are all in a granular form. And it's really hard to get that stuff to stick to vegetation where the ants live. So we've developed a gel type bait, which is sticky. We can shoot up into the vegetation and get the ants that are actually doing most of the damage. We've been working with one grower on the east side of the island who has a fairly substantial tropical fruit orchard, and our aim there has been to demonstrate or to work together to develop methods to get little fire ants out of large areas. And we're now doing a similar thing on the west side with the infested coffee farm. I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Anishi's involvement with this. The Hawaii Tourism Authority has just awarded us with a major grant. By us, it's a partnership between Hawaii Ant Lab and the county. We put in a joint application for some grant funds to manage little fire ants on public land. And that's becoming a growing issue here. The infested beach parks, people get stung there weekly or sometimes even daily. It's an ongoing issue. We've also managed under the federal farm bill to get some funds to systematically engage the smaller plant vendors who are historically very difficult to get together. And we're also working with the Office of Mauna Management with the invasive ant component of their invasive species plan. I'd like to thank you for your time. Our website URL is up on screen. It's quite a good resource, and we try to provide as much information as we can. Some of it theoretical, some of it practical, but altogether I think it's quite helpful for most purposes. And that's the end of my presentation, but I'm sure there are some questions.
Yeah. What do we do to just really have a significant impact? I mean, what we said in 2008, I mean, I felt, let's educate, let's inspect, let's do all these good things, and here we are, and with you, an incredible resource, so we have all of this, but what do we say, don't move upon a plant, we try to get the newspapers, we put front page, how do we at least stop where we are? I mean, I can see how difficult it is. I don't know, what additional grants we can get? That was one of the things that we focused on. Or do we just need as a county to come up with what additional money or what state money? I mean, I don't think we all want our pets to be blind and our kids to be hurt. As we, I just think this is a massive problem that deserves a massive response. And what is that? What do you recommend just that we do to really have a change course here?
I can't comment on anything that is outside my jurisdiction. So that issues about inspection or quarantine and those sort of areas are not really within my expertise. It's really more for the Department of Agriculture, either the Hawaii Department of Agriculture or the USDA. I do know, and I'm very aware of some excellent inter-island quarantine procedures that are in place, but I'm not an expert on those. So I'll limit talking about this particular island, if you like. The more resources brought to bear, I'm sure the bigger the impact will be. I'm not a bean counter. I'm a semi-scientist, I guess. What we try to do is find problems, find the biggest problem, and try to find a solution, and then take the solution to the person who's got the problem. And that's pretty broad here. It's anyone from a little old lady that lives in a small house here in the township to a person who's got several 100,000 orchids, orchids running in full production for export to California. So because the problem cuts across so many different sectors, the problem itself is extremely diverse, and certainly funds will help. This is not our lab is not funded by ongoing funding. We are funded by grants, and the Department of Agriculture and the Hawaii Invasive Species Council have been excellent at supporting a very large chunk of what we do. Between them, they provide almost 2/3 of our funds, and the other third of our funds comes from other projects. I guess I'm lucky not to have to be a politician and make these financial calls on what's important and what's not important, but certainly more funds will allow us to have more people on the ground and be able to do more things.
Right. I think the key thing for me is that really this is a problem that every one of us have on this island, because it's either us or our neighbor, a member of our family, or like this little girl in my district that was hospitalized and really put in danger, and it was just rapid. So I'm going to yield for other considerations and how and.
Thank you. Councilmember Elegant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Vanderwood, as I look at the approximate infested areas, it's all of District 4, Lower Puna, and we've been having this ag talk story. And I would like to invite you to one of our workshops. We had over 60 farmers that came over who were interested in ag. And one of the concerns they had was the fire ants. And you said you want to bring the solutions to the people. Well, I want to bring you to the people, and hopefully I'll get your contact information after this. And if you're willing to do that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. We have a, am I still on? We have a regular calendar of public outreach events. We go to a lot of those sort of meetings and those sort of workshops, and we'd love to add that to our list.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. Councilmember Ford.
Thank you. Would you explain about Tango and the gel bait, and what kind of a spray rig is needed to get this stuff up the trees?
Yes, Tango is a commercial product. It's a methoprene concentrate. Methoprene is a chemical that's has been used for a long time, especially in vector control, so dealing with mosquito larvae, and also in stored grain. It's one of a group. It's a chemical in a group of chemicals that are known as insect growth regulators. So what they do is they mimic some of the hormones in female ants and other insects and basically trick that animal into thinking it's younger than it is. And then what happens is that the insect's ovaries stop producing eggs. So you cut off the supply of new, in the case of ants, you cut off the supply of new ants. And the worker ants, the ones that we see every day, are not the queens. The queens are actually kind of hidden away in the nest, but those worker ants only live for a few months. So if we can stop the queens from making new babies, the worker ants just die off, basically from old age, and eventually that colony ceases to be an effective colony. The advantage that I see in Tango is that, one, it's a very benign chemical. It has it's one of the, we would call it a soft chemical. It's so benign that the EPA does not require what's known as tolerance data on agricultural cropping. Normally, if you had a rambutan orchard and you wanted to use a spray to kill bugs on rambutan, the label of the bug spray you would buy would have to have on it, this is okay to use on rambutan. Interestingly, there are no chemicals that are registered for use on rambutan, because the manufacturers then have to prove to the EPA that using their product won't result in tainted fruit. And that's an expensive process for the chemical manufacturer. So expensive that for many of our crops, there simply isn't enough acreage to make it worthwhile. Methoprin is exempt from those rules because it's so benign. The EPA have said it's okay to use it on pretty much any crop. So one, it's environmentally very safe. Two, it's very effective. Unfortunately, it's slow acting. It takes time, and people like instant results. But the most important thing is the label allows us to mix it in a bait of our choice. So we've been able to tailor a bait that not only lets us get it into vegetation, but also that it's the most attractive matrix for LFA. So it's a marriage made in heaven.
Where do we buy
for us?
The gel bait for those people who need to spray this stuff wherever?
The gel bait's a homemade bait at this stage. There's a recipe on the website. The main issue we have at the moment is that being an agricultural product, it's sold in very large containers at a high price. So the only container size that we can get it in at the moment is 2.5 gallons, which is enough to last a person on a 5th acre property about 20 years. We're working very hard with the manufacturer and a local supplier and a packaging company to get that to be repackaged in a smaller size, and we're very close to seeing that on the market.
Can you mix is it metha or methyl?
Metho.
Meth.
M-E-T-H-O.
Oh, methyl.
P-R-E-N-E.
All right. Can you mix? What is the boric? I know what boric acid is. So what does it do? And can you mix Tango and boric acid for a faster kill rate?
You could mix the Tango and boric acid. Boric acid's slightly faster acting, but it's a stomach poison. The neat thing about Tango is that the worker ants that are taking that bait back to the nest are unaffected, so they keep on harvesting that bait and bringing it back to the nest and feeding it to the queen and all the larvae. The more of that they do, the better it is.
Okay.
So
So
if
you
you
don't
start
wanna kill
killing,
them fast.
at that point they're kind of your friends.
Yes.
They're doing your job for you.
Okay.
I'm a lazy bugger. I don't do work if I don't have to. And so if these ants want to do the work for me, that's fine by me.
All right. Thank you. I yield.
But there is a recipe which uses the same matrix that you could you could mix boric acid with under certain circumstances, and you need to read the how-to guide very carefully. There are situations where people can make that bait quite legally and use it on their own property.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councilmember Alicia.
Thank you. I've been involved with Dr. Kaz for a while, and he mentioned about getting this tourism grant, and Dr. Kaz did try to apply last year, but we couldn't get the approval. But then this year, and I want to also mention that I want to thank Clayton Homa and Pat Daly from Parks and Rec. Clay Tillman, the director, Pat Daly, the from Parks Maintenance, they were very instrumental in helping with getting this grant because what we needed to do was we needed to get, I guess, supplemented from Parks and Rec or from the county saying, okay, this is how much we're gonna be, I guess, putting up there, like not so-called money funding, but was like from manpower. So we had like manpower hours times whatever, and that helped to get the, I guess, the equalization of getting the grant from the tourism. And what happened is that down at Lelive, a lot of the tourists and or the public was getting stung because the ants would fall from the tree and then they would get stung. So working with Parks and Rec, or really even working with Dr. Kaz and also with Dr. Arnold Hara, they went down there, they inspected, and they said, yeah, you folks do have a problem with fire ants. But the thing was, it was up in the coconut trees. And so it was like, how are we going to treat this? Because they could throw the poison out on the ground, which would help that. But the ones up in the trees was the one that the problem. And those trees are so tall, and then that's where um, I guess from the requirements of the water control, the EPA, that because of certain poisons, you couldn't use that poison at the beaches because of the quality of the water and stuff like that, the protection. So that's where we got the zoo involved because we found out that the zoo had problems with fire ants and also it would start affecting the animals, like it would start attacking the animals. So Dr. Cass decided, okay, he wants to do this project and do a testing so he can get this certain bait or this poison that can be used as data so he can propose that to the EPA, correct? Yeah. And maybe you can add on a little about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I probably need to repeat that applying for grants is quite complicated. It requires all the I's to be dotted and the T's to be crossed. And Councillor Onishi and the county people were really, really good at getting all the information to me. The issue we have with applying pesticides near water is that there has been a recent policy change at federal level on this, and there was for many years the EPA ruling on applying using any kind of pesticides near water was that if you follow the label, it's all okay. But it turns out that FIFA or the legislation, federal legislation that deals with pesticides, and the Clean Waters Act were at conflict with each other on this point. And the FIFA policy or the EPA policy on this was overruled in federal court on the mainland some years ago, and responsibility for issuing permits moved from the EPA, who said no permit needed, to the various state departments of health. And that transition took some time, and we were caught up in the middle of that transition. And that wasn't just our particular project, but that's applying any kind of pesticide or herbicide near water. All those activities were held up until the correct regulatory framework was in place. So that just added to the problem for us.
Councilmember Floyd?
Is it, may we have your permission to copy things from your website and email it out to our farmers and hotels and everything else?
Oh yes, just feel free. In fact, I've been working on a standalone compact disc version that I'll be happy to, when it's complete, which will be soon. I'd be happy to provide you with some master copies of that.
Thank you.
That might be a good way to
Yes.
get information
All right,
across.
thank you very much.
Councilmember Kanuga?
Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It's really helpful. I was noticing what you're doing about the prevention on Hawaii Island, and I know there's a lot of assistance on the east side, and especially, I know there's a big problem. I'm really concerned about the small populations here and there on the west side, and pretty much throughout the whole island, in preventing this spread of the fire ant, and was wondering what else we could do on the west side to increase that awareness. I know you put down increase the awareness and provide information, but if you could also help out with the presentations, the how-to guides for the residents or the community groups and gardening clubs on the west side as well, or maybe throughout the whole island, to let them know exactly what to do. I'm going to send out an email to everybody on my contact list. I mean, we have a lot of farms, and I know the testifier earlier about her farm having a big infestation. Um, and we do have a lot of vacant farms. Nobody's really taking care of them. So how we can work with all these different landowners in preventing the spread from the farms to the vacant farms, and whatever we can do. I mean, we do not want this spread. I don't even know if there was a fire. I was walking on my property down on Levy Drive and was starting to get bit by red ants. I didn't know if they're fire ants or not. And I think I called the Department of Ag just to let them know where this. I didn't know if it was a fire ant or some other kind of red ant that we've been having for years here, but just to get the information out, get the knowledge out of what we can do, what people can do to spread that information of what types of materials to use or what. I think that'll be helpful to everybody. And I just want to say thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you. Yeah, we do visit the west side quite regularly. What we do there is we focus on presenting this information and increasing awareness at public meetings, whether that be certain garden groups or garden societies or industry. So we've spoken regularly with at regular events organised by the Farm Bureau on that side, and we certainly speak quite frequently at, for example, the various, there's 2 different coffee groups, but there are other agricultural groups too. So we focus on that form of outreach for the west side, but we can't respond, rarely can we respond to an individual request on a face-to-face basis, because there are just thousands and thousands of people that are involved. And for me to make a site visit at Captain Cook, that's 5 hours of driving. And then I've got 3 hours left to do some work for the day. And even for me to go to Pahoa, it's unreal. We just don't have the time. You know, there are weeks where we might get 30 or 40 just phone calls from people who really need help. So we focus on mass forms of outreach, and that will be, we speak at like a lot of different events, and we focus on our website, getting information there, and most people can access the website, and if not, we can get the information to them by regular post, or they can drop into our offices.
Yeah, I think the CD you were talking about earlier would be extremely helpful to hand out. And I don't know if you mentioned if Hal was the only group doing this type of work with the fire ant on this island.
No, we don't own little fire ants. Certainly, the ARS, the USDA have various research projects. So Dr. Follett, for example, would be one person who's done some work with that, and Dr. Yang, and then CETA, which is the Agricultural Extension Centre on Kaimahana. Dr. Arnold Hara has worked for many years, especially with the nursery industry and the ornamental industry. So he's also quite a key player, and he spent many years developing things that are even more exotic than me sometimes.
Thank you. Councilmember Woolley?
Clearly, this is a massive epidemic on this island, and I think just for all of us, how do we deal with a crisis? It's acute. I mean, it's us saving our ag industry. I mean, back when I was promoting, maybe we needed an ag department. It's this kind of thing. What do we have that level of leadership? So, Jeff, I would just ask you, in terms of research and development, and in terms of the budget presentations, you know, what monies and what is available and what is not, and what do we need to come up with, and in terms of personnel, funds, whatever. So I really I want to continue this conversation. As far as I'm concerned, I'd have it on the agenda every week until we deal with this. Anyway, thank you very much. And again, I want to say, I think that we have a real obligation to tackle this in a very aggressive way. Thank you.
Any other further discussion? Councilmember Onishi?
Greg, can you come up for a quick one? I know Tim mentioned about the composting and stuff like that because, well, because the one day when we went down, Dr. Kaz, Dr. Arnold, and stuff like that, they at Lily, at Richardson's, they were trimming the trees on the coconut trees, the leaves, and what was happening? That poor guy who was up on that lift was getting all stung or bitten, right? So when they brought down the leaves and so forth, then Dr. Kaz, you and Dr. Arnold Hara, yeah, you folks went look at it, and you folks found out that there were fire ants, and the company was taking the leaves, throwing them into their trucks, and I guess I don't know where they were taking them, but it could have been down to the landfill. So what happens? And that's where, see, I think what's happening to it is people are transporting fire ants without knowing, and that's why it's spreading to the different locations. So this, if it goes to the landfill, it gets all compost or mulched up, and suppose ants are in there, and then when people pick it up, they take it to their farm or their home, that might be where they transport it again. So do you folks have any ideas, or you folks know any situations?
Greg Goodale, Solid Waste Division Chief. Well, I'm actually going to call on Dr. Vanderwood because he's actually worked with us at both West Side and East Side on some of the different issues that have been at these organic collection facilities. So if you could speak to some of the things that have been done.
The Department of Agriculture for many years has regularly, I'm still so better, regularly surveyed the landfill in Hilo, especially the green waste area. Now the issue with green waste management, and I'm by no means an expert in it, is that we could survey the pile of green waste today, and there could be completely free of fire ants. And then as we leave the site, another truck rolls up with material from an infested property, so that the game changes. And so a substantial percentage of properties now have little fire ants on this side of the island, and that translates directly to a substantial percentage of green waste coming into that facility will also be infested. So that's an issue that it's a conveyor belt issue, and it's an issue that I'm not qualified to comment on. But I think what we did a few years ago was work to ensure that the site remained ant-free. And because and the material that's processed is potentially infested with a whole bunch of things. Little fire ants is one of them, coca frogs, weed seeds, other invasive species, because it's green waste that's been mulched up. So the people who use that, the end users, should be aware of that. And if they are, then they can make their own decisions on whether they wish to take that risk. And if I had a property already infested with little fire ants, it wouldn't bother me. I want that mulch. And if I had a property that wasn't infested and I didn't care, then I could make a conscious choice. I guess as a user, whether it's a user or not. So it's a very complicated situation. I've actually just come back from a study trip to Tahiti. I took some personal time, and I worked with the county there on another project, exactly the same issues. What do we do with the green waste? It's potentially infested. How do we manage it? And the way they managed it at the time was their pile of green waste just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now they've got a mountain of organic material that they don't know what to do with.
Yeah, I don't know if the council members know, but if you folks ever seen fire ants, but they're like super small. I mean, they're like how they're like what kind of centimeters or inches, like 1/16th of an inch.
About 1 millimeter, so a 1/16th of an inch or maybe smaller.
Yeah.
So they're absolutely tiny. They're like a speck of pepper.
Right.
Often people are stung and don't actually know that they've been stung by fire ants because they either can't see them if they're old like me, or the ants have moved on, after the stinging event. So that they're so small, they're has to be unnoticeable.
And so, great. Do you folks, I guess, have like maybe a process of, or maybe folks can inspect green waste before it goes there to get mulched? I mean, Is that a possibility?
Currently, the contractor, they don't inspect, but we do go and we've relied on the ag department to do some surveys along with our contractor. Our contractor has continued what was begun quite a while back of putting some different things around the facility. Because again, the idea is basically we're trying to prevent anything from getting into our facility that may be trying to come into the facility from outside. But again, as was mentioned before, the materials are coming from all over, and it's not as if we have the ability to go through and survey every incoming load of material that comes in. Essentially, the message we try and get out to people is that they're taking this material at their own risk, because as he said earlier, it's not just a little fire ant, it's several different things that if you don't have some of these things and you take the mulch away, you could be bringing it back to your property.
No, I understand, but see, like listening to what Ms. Willie had mentioned about how we can solve this problem, right? And I think that's where one of the starts are is that we gotta stop them from transporting it out, right? And that's why it's spreading to other districts. And because of funding, lacking of funding from the state to the Department of Ag, and also like funding from R&D to, I guess, to DM for control, that's where our problems are, right? And so what I'm saying is that we need to stop transporting the fire ants, especially because like I said, those leaves, the coconut leaves that were cut at Richardson's, guaranteed must have gone back to the Hero landfill, right? And it might have gone to the mulching system, right? So we know for a fact, and they found the fire ants on there, that it had to go there, and now if it didn't die through the mulching system, it would be in that whole bunch. And then now when people took that, they would be taking the fire ants to whatever location, right? And so that's how these ants are being spread too, because what we kind of found out was that along in Kipgaha, like all the different beaches, they started to get the fire ants. So we were wondering, right, how would they get transported to there? And then one possibility was that with the parks, because when they go clean up the parks, like they have their trash bags, and if the ants are in that location and you're transporting these bags, and then you go to a next location, they might be dropping off, and that's how a spread could be. Or the other spread is through air, right? If the wind is blowing hard, right, and the ants are in the trees, then they kind of get blown off the tree, and then they go into the next other areas. So that's all possible, spreadings of this fire ants. But if there is a possibility where we can get you guys more funding to help control that, I mean, I don't know if Dr. Cash, you folks did a research where how is the fire ants being spread?
Mr. Misha, we haven't done any direct research on that, but it's very clear when having dealt with it for some time that the movement of potted plants and other organic material, whether it be foliage or produce, or in this case mulch, that's generally the way this moves long distances. And just looking at the numbers, potted plants are probably the greatest risk or the greatest cause for the movement of material, of new ants to new locations. So definitely the potted plants are the biggest offender. Once they arrive at a site, they will establish and spread all by themselves, but they'll do that much more slowly. So they could be measured in tens of feet or maybe hundreds of feet a year. So the movement of potted plants and other infested material gives the ants that long distance advantage, that they can move 10 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles, and then once established, then they can spread slowly and then end up in the neighbouring properties and in properties that neighbour that. So it's a two-pronged kind of
Thank you.
situation.
Thank you. Councilmember Ford?
A couple of quick comments. This is the reason that we don't want east side greenways coming to the west side of the island, because they're transporting this thing. But the other thing, this is not just an ag issue, this is a homeowner issue, because they can get in your home, they can get in your yard on your pets. It's also a hotel issue. As it gets established in a hotel, all that business is going someplace else. Because nobody wants to come to Hawaii and be eaten alive by fire ants. The last time it was- Thank you, Margaret, for bringing this up.
Councilmember Lilly?
Two things. One, my understanding is that if you take mulch and turn it into compost, you eradicate, you get rid of the fire ants. Is
Yes,
that correct?
I'm not a solid waste management expert, but I do know a little bit about composting at an industrial level. We had a very similar problem in Brisbane when I was working on the Reading Water fire issue there. And certainly professional, we tend to call composting, we tend to call a whole bunch of things that we do composting. I mean, throwing some vegetable scraps in a pile for something is composting. But real composting done at a professional level requires an accelerant to material to heat the pile up to pre-specified temperatures, and there's quite an exacting standard available, and those temperatures exceed the threshold of ants and other insects to live. So
That was what I had
yeah.
heard, is that the profession, those who are involved with composting here on the island, that's one of the reasons they advocate compost. I mean, I think I'm also hearing about, fire ants at the west side landfill. It's not just which side. So let's just get this tackled. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ants and cockroaches will rule the world.
Seeing no further discussion, can I call a voice vote? All those, motion, wait, let's see. Yeah, voice to file communication 169. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Seeing no further business, may I have a motion to
Move to
adjourn?
adjourn.
It's been moved by Councilmember Kern and seconded by Councilmember Infinici. This meeting is hereby adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.